Robert, thank you for taking the time to come on today. I really appreciate it. I'm sure a lot of the listeners and watchers of this podcast are really going to appreciate it as well, because you have so much to share and you are a true polymath in the true sense of the word. So just to kick things off, do you mind introducing yourself, what it is you're involved in on a day-to-day basis?
Sure. My name is Robert Grant, and I have been largely working for the last 25 years or so in industry and business. And in the last, I'd say 5 to 7 years, I started transitioning into other areas. I started out mainly in healthcare, but also very interested in laser technologies as well as working in fintech and other such fields. And more recently, I kind of had this big change in my life, probably starting in 2012, but really culminating in 2016. I had been a pharma CEO of all things, right? That's probably, I'm hoping that, everyone will be kind to the notion that not all pharma CEOs are like these evil, iconoclastic, sort of like Smithers type of people, right? On The Simpsons. I don't think that the pharma industry is necessarily has people that are individually bad, but I do think that the pharmaceutical industry is, very much money oriented. And so, and profit driven. And as companies are, it's kind of the whole system that we have right now, which is very, scarcity based. And so I broke away from that, having been a CEO of a very large pharma company, and actually led 2 large pharma companies. And then I started my own group of companies in 2012, which was kind of an act of rebellion. And now those companies have grown into 16 different companies inside our portfolio. The group of companies I run is called Strathspey Crown. And we have energy, fintech companies, healthcare services, healthcare finance, as well as pharmaceuticals. And also I most recently started a company that relates to the mathematics work that I've been doing. I discovered the first prime number pattern, and that pattern basically allows us to predict prime numbers infinitely. And so when I published that, I learned from some of my friends in the cryptography space that was a real problem for encryption potentially. And so then we needed a new type of encryption modality that could replace the standard that's in place right now. And so that company is called Crown Sterling. But I think most probably people would recognize for your viewership me potentially as someone who's very involved in mathematics and geometry. But not just looking at mathematics in a nameless, faceless sort of way, but how mathematics actually shows, the connectedness of the entire universe. And I do a lot of work in physics. I'm partners with Nassim Haramein, who's a famous physicist. We've been working together now for about 6 years or so. And I'm also involved with him with Resonance Academy and Resonance Foundation. And so, I just started sharing about, only 2 years ago, I started sharing my work. And I was invited to go to Egypt with Nassim, and he asked me to present the work that he had known all about mathematically, because we were working on a lot of physics projects together. And I'd never shared it openly or widely before. And I was astounded when half the room was in tears at the end of the talk, because I presented math not in the way that we learned in junior high. I presented it like a language and speaking to the universe and speaking with the universe. And that there is a language, just like all languages, there's a syntax to it. There are verbs, there are nouns, there's meanings that come behind those numbers. And we can often just sort of look at it like a computer sheet, ones and zeros or decimal numbers, and it just seems so impersonal. But actually, each number is a fragment or a fractal of consciousness. And when you can see it in that context and see how they arrange in beautiful geometries, and then can actually take in the communication from the universe, because it is the universal language, it really has an astounding impact on consciousness. And those are the things that I've probably become most interested in. I'm also very interested in Egyptology, and I just got back from Egypt, so I'll be happy to answer any questions about that. I discovered the first writing inside the Great Pyramid on the sarcophagus in May of 2018. And it was strangely an alpha omega symbol that had not been seen before, that's pressed into the rose granite sarcophagus. And on my last trip, I just discovered with our whole team of people, about 50 people were with me, we discovered about 8 new stone reliefs inside the King's Chamber. and it was all tied to a very interesting encryption left to us by Leonardo da Vinci. So I'm interested in lots of different things. I'm a musician and an artist as well, and that's part of my life that I haven't really tapped in until probably the last few years. I was always a musician from the beginning, but I hadn't been like an artist or a sculptor until the last several years, and I started getting into that too, and I'm just really loving life right now and loving the journey. So I'm really pleased to be here with you, Adam, and a big fan of your work too.
Thank you very much. Yeah, and do you find that you're accessing and tapping into that creative aspect of your personality more so now that you're getting involved in all this stuff versus before when you were into the CEO, the director position in the pharmaceuticals? Do you feel like back then there was just something lacking and missing that you just couldn't quite pin?
No, it's kind of funny. It's like I was thinking about this just yesterday. I was driving into the office where like half the people were gone, and today the other half that were there are now gone because of the whole coronavirus thing. It's funny. I was asking myself the question, why is it that I chose to go into business? Because when I was an undergrad, I had a music scholarship, and I loved music. I was really into it, performance major. And then I figured out one day that I need to make money because I couldn't make my tuition. I didn't have anyone paying for my school or anything. And I thought, well, geez, I better go get jobs. So I got like 3 jobs while I was in college. And I had to really practice some ingenuity because there was no way I could pay tuition. I could pay everything, and I had to kind of cover it all for myself. And I ended up choosing to go into business because it was most expedient to making money. It wasn't because like I loved it. And the other thing that I did like about it actually was that I didn't have to choose any specialty. I was interested in many different areas like biology and medicine and law and business and all kinds of different areas like science and math and everything. And so I thought, well, kind of not forcing me to choose a particular subject because then I'd be cutting off all the others, right? I chose business because I felt like I was not eliminating anything by doing that, right? And I had always been kind of like, I felt like I should be a jack of all trades and not necessarily a master of any. And so I went into the business realm. And that was really the reason why I went into business. I had to raise a family and I had to pay bills. And so I chose business. And I think that's a problem in our educational system, candidly. We force people into buckets very early in their lives. And I think it all stems back from scarcity concept because, we think we only have so much time. So if I only have so much time, then I have to choose one career and I can only do that one career. Whereas actually I was still a musician at heart and I was an artist that I didn't even know it, the poet that didn't know it. And I felt like something was missing, and I was very successful at building up this persona, building up this, who is Robert Grant to the outside world? And all of the things that come along with that, the lifestyle, the house, the car, the family, all the boxes got checked. But I was just eliminating, in a way, the other half of myself that I didn't want to show the world or I didn't want to associate with. Maybe because I was a little ashamed of it. I remember when I finally chose to go into business and I wanted to buckle down, as it were. I needed to have some discipline, right? And I never told anyone anymore that I was a musician or that I even love music, because I started associating musicians with kind of like this lackadaisical attitude of like, kind of the beatnik, right? Who, I don't know why I came up with that association. It clearly isn't true, but I don't know. I didn't want to associate with that side of myself. And so as I started to separate out the parts of me into the parts I wanted to project to the outside world, and then the parts that I wanted to hide from the outside world, that separation got greater and greater and greater until, you finally end up having a confrontation with that shadow that you've created, right? Which is still there. And, you can skip rungs on the ladder. I was the youngest CEO of a healthcare company that's publicly traded in the world when I was 32 years old. And that was like, I was very lucky and successful, and I felt very blessed. So I was riding that train. I was going to ride that horse all the way until finally you get to a point in life where I remember I had just gotten an award from like University of California, Irvine, because they knew that I could help fill tables, right? If they gave me an award like Man of the Year type of thing, because I was teaching there at UCI also, and entrepreneurship and other stuff. And then I was asked by Chapman University to give a commencement speech. And my mother gave me a hug and she's like, son, I never thought that you were going to be successful like this. I hope you're not trying to do this to prove something to me, right? Because my mom, candidly, love her to death, but she was that kind of mom, a little bit tiger mom, that would say to me, oh, you got all A's and 1 A minus. Next time, if you get all A's and no A minuses, then I'll really love you.
Wow. Yeah.
Right? Pretty brutal, right?
Yeah.
So I always felt like in the back of my mind, and it's funny because when I say that to her now, I spoke at my parents' 50th anniversary a few years ago, and I told that story, and everybody was like, oh my gosh, right? That's like brutal. And my mom was like, that's why you were successful.
Yeah.
She was like, it's all because of me, right? It's all because of me. And I'm like, look, I love you, Mom, just the way you are. It's all good.
Yeah.
It's all good. But, I came up against that wall that so many of us experience when there's just something missing. And I think, I was on an airplane flying back from Hong Kong when I was about 42, I think. And the plane, I've actually survived 3 plane crashes, if you can believe this. I've flown so much. I've lived in 9 countries. And I've survived 3 plane crashes. A lot of people say, oh, I don't want to fly with Robert because he's like been in 3 plane crashes. I'm like, hey, dude, maybe it's the other way around. Maybe you want to fly with me because I've survived 3 plane crashes.
Yeah.
Maybe it's a super lucky thing to fly with me. And, but I remember on this plane, it was like a super turbulent flight. And the old airport in Hong Kong, if you've ever flown to Hong Kong, I mean, literally there was this airport in Hong Kong that when you'd have a storm, they would have to fly through the buildings, like in a 747. And no joke, you'd fly into Hong Kong and you'd like wave at the people putting their laundry out, right? They're at the same level as you. And they're only like 150 feet from the wing, tip of the wing. It's like, what? It was so scary. And I remember being on one of these flights in super turbulence. And I'm like, oh my gosh, I could die here. Right? This could all be the end. And I remember thinking to myself, you know what? If this is the end, I've lived a great life. I just felt at that moment, I'm like, I could die. I'm lucky I've had a good family. I have a daughter that I love and adore, and she loves and adores me. And, I've done all the things. I've seen all the places I want to go to. But then it kind of prompted me to start thinking, well, if I really am not afraid to die now, then am I living life in a way that is going to let me play to win for the rest of my life, or am I playing not to lose in a way, right? And so I started thinking I might as well live life to the fullest now and go all the way full tilt, right? Like on the old pinball machine. I'm going to push the pinball machine to tilt because I'm not afraid to die anymore. And what do I really want to experience? And that's when I started noticing that, I think that's the first time I wrote down on my notebook that duality isn't really what it's perceived to be. And I started writing down, because I'd met this guy who, while I was in Hong Kong, after I'd had this thought and discussion in my own mind, I met this guy at this salad bar who worked for my company. I was at Bausch & Lomb at the time. And he had left on a 5-year sabbatical. He was the country manager for a large operation in Thailand. I had 11,000 employees in the company. And so I had not seen or met this guy, but he literally went on a 5-year sabbatical. We don't do that in the US, right? And I'm like, why did he go on a 5-year sabbatical? And why did we let him back? Well, the guy was super successful. And the reason why we let him back is because he had such a legacy of success. And I asked him, where did you go for 5 years? And he said, I went to a monastery to be a Buddhist monk, and I took a vow of silence for 5 years. And he's like, I just got done last week. So I'm like, dude, didn't you want to go home and talk to everybody, first? You took a vow of silence for 5 years and you're talking to me now a week later? That's kind of crazy. I said, what was it like? What did you learn, while you did this? And he said, there is no duality. There's only one. And I was like, okay, you need to give me more than that. He goes, it's all an illusion. And I remember that moment because then flying back to California, I started thinking about the concepts of duality. And I started thinking about Democrats and Republicans and how they were so far polarized from each other. And I started thinking, I put on a piece of paper, I'm like, okay, far right is, you know, probably fascism, and far left in a political science perspective is communism. But wait a minute, I can't differentiate between fascism and communism in today's world. Is North Korea a fascist regime or is it a communist regime? They look the same.
Mm-hmm.
And so I started realizing that it's a circle, right? And that I started thinking, well, is this true for other concepts too? So in fact, let me take a word like humble versus arrogant. Is that also a circle? I mean, is it possible that if you keep going one more step to the extreme, that you end up on the other side? And that sunk in deeply for me because I started thinking, okay, well, do I know people that become so humble that actually they become arrogant and pious in their humility?
Mm-hmm.
Right? Are they pompous in a way because they are self-righteous? And I started thinking, wow, I noticed that too. And we always learn the term, there's a fine line between love and hate, right? And
Yeah.
I put every single thing I could think of, like I think I had about 200 different concepts like that. I put them on a piece of paper and realized that the far extreme of each of these concepts basically impinged on the other side. And then I started realizing, wow, everything really is one. And then you start thinking, well, if I walk north on the earth, I eventually end up south. If I walk west, I eventually end up east. That causes me to start thinking differently about the concept of time as well, by the way.
Mm-hmm.
We make the separation between past, present, and future. Who knows? Maybe now that they've just realized that the universe is truly round, right? That it's spheroidal, and that if you fire a photon into it in concept, it should loop back around and end up where it started again, kind of like throwing one of those boomerangs, right? It comes back to you. And if that's the case, then time would be the same. But maybe the distant past becomes the far future and vice versa. And I think there's a lot of research that's going to be going into this over the next, course of the next few years. But this concept of non-duality really hit me hard. And I was in the process of deconstructing, I guess, at that moment in time, my whole conditioning and thought process around what is good, what is evil. If you think about the three institutions that are sort of the harbingers, right, of what is moral, what is amoral, that would be religion. What is what is truth and what is falsehood, that would be educational systems, right? And then you've got government that's determining what's lawful and what's unlawful. And all three of those institutions today are in massive disarray. Why? Because people are starting to ask the same questions that I was asking about this illusion of duality. And they don't want to be told anymore what is moral and what is amoral. They don't want to be told anymore what is lawful and what is unlawful. They don't want to be told anymore, what is truth and what is falsehood from an educational perspective. I mean, it's a fascinating thing to me because today, in today's world, people are so interested in learning but have no interest in the educational system.
Yeah.
People are so fascinated in community but have very little interest in participating in government. People are enthralled, right, with these different aspects of society that now all of a sudden, people want to learn, but they don't want to go to school. People want to be part of community, but they don't want to be part of government, right? I mean, this concept is very, very deep when you think about it. And all the structures and strictures in society today that are trying to tell us what is good, what's evil, what's right, wrong, right, what's moral, what's amoral. People are interested more than ever in spirituality, and yet religions are at a difficult spot right now with membership dwindling. And you have to ask yourself this question, what does this really mean? And I think it comes back to the empowerment of individuals. I think it comes back to this concept of people wanting to make their own determination and people not down anymore with this concept of blame and shame that they cast on themselves or they're casting on others. And as I kind of went through this process, it kind of woke me up, I guess, to use the today's vernacular of woke AF, right? I think it all started with this concept of looking at duality in a different light and realizing the illusion of it at all. And then also realizing that if that's true, then why am I suppressing this other part of my personality, this other side of me? You know, the way to think about this, I guess, as an analogy, is that, you know, I have this, everyone has one of these on their desk, right? Probably not. This is a Da Vinci Codex, right? It's one of those things, right? The little secrets and stuff like that. But it's a gold color, and the reason why I show it to you is not because it's a codex and it's kind of cool. The reason I show it to you is because the color of this is not really gold. It's reflecting gold, right? The real color of this is probably something more like a pale bluish color, because that's its absorption color. So if I looked at the spectral analysis of this, then this would be, you know, reflection of gold, and it would be absorption of like a pale blue color. Okay, it's just as much pale blue as it is gold. We create the duality perception to see it as only gold. Okay, if we looked at it through a picture that was a negative picture, right, as you can do in photography, we would see the other color. Now, why is this important? It's so true also with our personalities. A narcissism is not true self-love. Narcissism is loving the projection or the reflection we see of ourselves in the mirror. Self-loathing of your personality that would represent the absorbed color or the pale blue in this. It's falling in love with the gold color, right? It's falling in love with what you think is projected to the mirror reflection. And actually, true self-love means that you love both and you integrate both and you are both. And so what happens to people, and it certainly happened to me, is that as you separate further and further from the shadow, right, or this absorption color, and for me, that was the musician, that was the artist, that was all these other things, that was not the pharma CEO, right? As you separate more and more and more from that, eventually you end up having a crisis, right? Because that separation is just like pushing it too far. It's like you're repressing this side of your personality, and then it wants to come out. And then all of a sudden you're like, okay, midlife crisis, right? I'm going to go and drive a Porsche now or something. I'm going to go take a young girlfriend or something like that, right? I'm going to get unhinged for a while, right? And we've all seen this. And this is why it happens, because we've made this extreme separation of ourselves until it's no longer tenable. It's no longer sustainable. And you end up in this absolute crisis situation, which then leads to the hero's journey and finding your way back to oneness, finding your way back to your whole self can be the most beautiful thing that you can experience ever. And so as I kind of think about this reflection, absorption dilemma that we all face, right? That's what society is going through right now. And what do you do as soon as you make judgments on yourself? You cast them on others. So the things that you don't like about yourself are the things that you claim other people are doing. There's like this old term, right? If you spot it, that means you got it. Mm-hmm. So the judgment that you're casting on yourself is actually what you don't like about yourself. You're one side of yourself. And so it's like you're deflecting. This is why we have, you know, unfortunately, certain clergy ending up in certain areas because they want to hide that they have their demons, right? They want to hide that they maybe suffer from pedophilia. And maybe they themselves were abused, right? And that's part of the reason why they are, you know, engaging in that kind of abuse today. It's like this endless cycle, unfortunately, and hopefully it can be broken. But, you know, if they suffered from pedophilia, then maybe they would think, well, geez, I better go into a career that I can hide this part of myself because it's absolutely reprehensible. There's no way that anyone would think that if I'm a Catholic priest that I'm going to do this type of stuff, right? And now that's flipped on its head, right? Because everyone looks at it now, even a person who is like not engaged in any pedophilia, they're probably like, hey, I'm not a pedophile because I'm a Catholic priest. That's a tough thing for them to have to experience, I bet. So, you know, this is what's happening with society. And I think as we move more and more to true self-acceptance and self-love, then we'll start seeing major change in the world. And that's what I think, Gandhi means, and Bob Marley and all the others that have said, be the change that you want to see in the world. I think that's what they really meant. Be the non-judgment, be the acceptance that you want to see in the world. So my path was definitely that path, and that's what I experienced. Mm-hmm. And I feel some degree of joy and responsibility as well to share that openly with people, because I think that if there's one thing that, being the change you want to see in the world is, it's also recognizing that everything around you is part of you, that they are all just reflections, right, of what's happening inside you. In fact, you could refer to the universe not as the universe, but the you inverse.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. It's funny hearing you speak to these things, because I've spoken with on this podcast people that are very very on the spiritual side. They're Reiki healers and master healers, this and that, and they speak to. I've actually think one of them said you inversed exactly as you just described it there, and this is why I love speaking to you and love a lot of the work that you do, because you take a lot of the analytical side of things, but you bring it over to this philosophical side, which is really beautiful the way you do that, because it's like people that don't understand or don't quite resonate with a lot of what those master Reiki healers are speaking about. They may resonate more with what you're saying, and it may be a little bit clearer to them in how you're expressing it. So does this tie in a lot with, you came up with the theory that we're all divisions of one. Does this somewhat tie in with that theory?
Yeah, absolutely. In fact, going back to the same analysis of the spectral analysis of gold, right? So if I were to look at this on spectral analysis, it's going to have, there's 89 electrons on the gold, element, on the atom. And what's interesting about that is that it has a certain spectral analysis that will all come together in this color gold. But then it also has an absorption, which is exact opposite of that, right? So the absorption would be the pale blue color, and really all the lines that are not in wavelengths showing up are going to be all the other lines that are going to be absorbed. So it's either absorbing or it's reflecting, right, or emitting. And so what I realized was that through something called the Rydberg Constant, which is part of the Niels Bohr atom model, the Bohr atom model, which I think deserves a lot more attention. He was a contemporary of Einstein at the Solvang convention, back in this period of time. Probably there was like this big renaissance in the early 20th century, I would say, in physics. And the Rydberg constant came out of the Bohr atom model. And what it basically shows is how you can make a conversion from the hydrogen atom between its reflection spectra and its absorption spectra, and it's based on a simple reciprocal value, 1 over lambda, or 1 over x value. So what I realized then is I was like, wait a minute, if the Rydberg constant allows you to do that, and make that conversion to wavelengths of light, then why is that not also true when we're looking at us as human beings? Taking this one step further, right, which is if everyone around you is your you inverse, right, and you're experiencing these things over and over and over again. I mean, for example, I had to experience betrayal, extreme betrayal in my life, because I needed to learn unconditional love. We learn through the opposites. And the higher self knows what we need to learn. And so, instead of looking at those things that I'm learning as, oh my gosh, I need to learn another thing, learn to love and embrace it. And that's what actually allows you to transmute through it, right? And change through it. But basically, I realized that this Rydberg constant allowed you to run the mathematics and recognize that you are X. And the universe itself is the 1 over X, both mathematically and in physics. And it's very simple and very beautiful math. It also explains why we have particles and waves, because numbers in their 1 over X values turn very often, depending on which numbers you're talking about, into wave values versus particle values, which would be discrete. So discrete versus continuous values. So yes, I believe that we're all divisions of the number 1. And that creates infinity within it. It's interesting. You could take a number like 7, right? 7 is very unique. It's a very unique number. And today I posted a picture of a 7-pointed star, right, on Instagram. And Seven's unique because it recreates this number series in its 1 over x value. So 1 divided by 7 equals 0.142855714, repeating infinitely, right? And this 142855714 represents gravity and magnetism, electromagnetism. So the number 7, and from that, it can create the numbers of particle physics that create all matter. 369, so you probably heard, this whole famous quote by Nikola Tesla, which is, think in terms of vibration, energy, right? And think in terms of, if you know the mysteries of the numbers 3, 6, and 9, you know the secrets of the universe. Well, all matter is 3, 6, and 9. The electron is 3, 6 is the proton, and 9 is the neutron. And then there are even anti-proton, anti-neutron, and anti-electron, or what's also referred to as positron, which are 3 other numbers which are not part of our current base 10 system, but need to be part of our base 12 system. Because we actually have a base 12 mathematical system, just the world doesn't know about it just yet. And we're doing all kinds of work here with our math team that I have, about 11 mathematicians and physicists, and we're finding these natural relationships. Music has 12 notes in an octave, so should numbers have 12 single-digit numbers, right, embedded within our system. And that's a major shift, to a base 12. And that's why our oldest measurement systems, candidly, are all base 12, right? So the inch, foot, right? These imperial systems are on base 12 versus decimal is base 10. And I would argue that the imperial system is far more advanced even than the current base 10 system of decimal system. But nevertheless, what basically it's pointing to is that, literally, mathematically and physics, the universe is really just the number 1 divided. And the number 7 can create this infinite series of numbers that creates enough diversity to recreate itself over and over and over again. And that's very unique. And so that creates a wave function. So that 0.142855714 repeating infinitely is a wave. And 7 becomes a particle, in a sense, right? And so as we start looking at numbers differently and looking at it as a language, right, that opens up our consciousness to this different type of understanding. And this new understanding and higher understanding is not one of hyper-reductionism or hyper-specialization. In fact, you won't be able to see it. You won't be able to understand it because it requires connecting lots of dots. One of the things I really enjoyed about Steve Jobs' commencement speech was he said, I could never see how the dots connected in my life until I looked at them in retrospect, right? But clearly they connected. And if that's the case, then clearly there was some form of destiny at play in his life, right, that he saw. Because if dots connect, that means that there's some sort of invisible hand that's helping those dots even come into play, right? Why did he go to typesetting school, right, early on? And that had a huge impact on when computers all had these bitmapped images of fonts, right, that were really ugly and, didn't look like a real newspaper or something. He realized, oh, I need to have this actual typeset so people will read this like a newspaper. And that had a big impact on where he was going with things. Everything was connected. One of the things that Leonardo da Vinci said, and I actually posted this today as well, is that if you want to achieve a complete mind, study the art of science, study the science of art, learn how to see and realize that everything is connected. Literally everything is connected. That's the nature of consciousness. So I do believe that yes, this theory, and a lot more work is going to be done on this now. We're going to be publishing a paper on this, on the subject of being able to turn this concept of the Rydberg constant and wave particle duality into a number theory backed paper that we are going to be taking for publication and potentially peer review.
Very cool. Yeah, it's all very exciting stuff. And again, I love how you break it all down. And I wanted to ask you actually 2 things. Now, in math, would you describe it as a universal language or universally a way to communicate? Okay. So I wanted to ask, do you believe that this is one modality to bring us back into oneness, math as a language or a method of communication? And I would even reference or cite that the Tower of Babel in religion, it almost creates separation and you speak multiple languages as well. I don't think it's been mentioned so far, but coming from that understanding, do you believe that these different languages create this separation, create the duality, and they really kind of tie in with the tick-tock thinking mind, the really analytical human mind, and that mind loves the whole game of separation as well. So it's almost as if the different languages and the aspect of duality creates the separation, which holds us in the illusion. So do you find that mathematics is a way to bring us out of this illusion and back into a universal language, or a means to communicating with each other on a level that's not necessarily, a base language like we're using English right now, but something that's a little bit higher than that, something that's more tuned in to a higher state of being, you could say, that's more understood by the higher self, you could even say that.
Mm-hmm. Oh, 100%. So, one of the things that I discovered in I had this big crisis in 2016 where it was all inside me, right? It ended up manifesting outside of me, but it was all inside me. It all emanated from me. So I don't blame anybody for it. I have nobody to blame but myself. And I don't even blame myself because I decided I don't want to feel shame. There's nothing, it's funny, people think that the world is a tough place because people don't like each other and they can't get along. I don't believe that. I believe the world is a tough place because people don't like themselves. And when they don't like themselves, they project that on other people. And they can't even be aware that they're doing it. That's the nature of narcissism in a way, right? And in that context, wants become needs. There's no such thing as true needs, because we could live without a lot of the stuff that we have, but we really believe we need it. That's because we convinced ourselves that we need it, right? And so when I experienced that, and I experienced extreme betrayal from a number of people that had played important roles in my life up to that point in time, it caused me to draw inward. I was always very extroverted, and all of a sudden I did not want to go outside. And some thought maybe I was in a depression or something. I was in a funk. And what I was really sad about, candidly, and hurt over, but I couldn't even come to terms with it myself, was that while I was always successful, I had lots of friends. People wanted to be around me all the time. But as soon as that success was threatened and called into question whether or not I was going to succeed in the fight I was going on with, this battle with the venture capital group, then people that had claimed to be my best friend for years and years, and my brother and blah, 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 or sister, yada, 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 literally, bailed. And it came down to it that I had to raise $55 million in a day, in one day, to remain in control of my companies and to continue with the mission that I was so strongly believing in. And somehow, some way, I lost total faith that I could do it, but somehow I did it. My partner and I, we were able to do it in a day, and we ended up winning the battle. But it felt like a Pyrrhic victory, because a Pyrrhic victory is when you win, but you felt like you lost at the end, because the collateral damage was so great. And it was so difficult that it caused me to draw inward. And I remember just being at home and thinking, okay, if all these relationships that I had perceived as, relatively objective, at least an objective component to it, were now ruined, and I experienced such extreme betrayal that I need to question everything. Because if that's my subjective world that I thought was at least had a degree of objectivity, now I need to question even objectivity itself. And so I started over, and I said, okay, what's the most objective of sciences? I'm going to reconstruct math in my mind. So let's start with 1 + 1. Is that really 2? Does it really? Okay, check. Yes. Is 1 + 3 4? Okay, check. I did that for mathematics and spent hours on hours on hours reconstructing and rethinking math, not as I was taught, but learning it as a language. And you're right, I speak 8 languages. And I've learned the language, I've learned the system of learning languages. The first language I learned outside of English was Korean. I was 19 years old, and I had a crash course to learn Korean in 3 months. And by 6 months, I was a translator. And I learned that I had a talent for it, first of all. I could definitely construct. It's like making puzzles in a way, right? And the Korean language syntax is backwards from English. So you don't say, I am going to the store, right? And Chinese would be very simple. I go store. That's it. 3 words, very simple. Korean is not like that. Korean is I to the store going am. So it's subject, object, verb rather than subject, verb, object. So you have to wait till the sentence is finished before you can translate the sentence, right? Because you don't know what's being said. And think about how that separates their way of thinking into, certain areas. That's why they're good in certain things, because they look at things differently. Their whole deductive and inductive reasoning is different because of their language construct, right, in their own minds. And so as I started learning all these other languages, Korean, Japanese, Chinese, and Mandarin Chinese, and becoming fluent in French and German, because I lived in all these countries also. And after I learned the system for learning languages, I thought, oh, I could learn any language now. I stopped at 8 because actually I learned more like 12. But it sounded ridiculous to say I speak 12 languages. It sounded ridiculous to say I speak 8 languages. But then I started looking at mathematics as a language. And very quickly I realized that the numbers were acting like nouns, and that the irrational numbers were acting like verbs. So the mathematical constants were the verbs of action. We take a word like text, which is a noun. We append ing to it, which is an unfinished action, right? Or we make it into a gerund, to text, or texting. And that unfinished action means that it's a verb that's happening, right? And so I applied that same concept to irrational numbers and said, okay, if it has an infinite tail on it, that's equivalent of the ing. So 3.1415926 is pi, and that is circling a diameter. Circling, it's the ing. So the math constants became the verbs. And then I realized that the sentences were arranged in syntax that happened and occurs through geometry inscribed within circles. So the geometry itself is speaking to us. There are certain geometries that seriously, they are embedded with information that speaks to your subconscious. You could think of your subconscious as like a QR code reader, right? Where you look at a QR code and you don't even have to read anything consciously. It's just being brought into you subconsciously. And that is very real. I'm telling you, that is extremely real. And there have been lots of tests on that as well, scientific tests on how people's moods can change. We see this with color therapy. We see this because those are all just different forms of geometries too. Mm-hmm. We see it with geometry therapy, and that's why people like to look at mandalas. Yeah. And it can really change your way of thinking and consciousness. So for me, it absolutely is a language, and it is the universal language. And people think that math is unemotional. Not true at all. Mathematics, when you understand what's being communicated, embeds within it all the emotion that could ever be communicated through any linguistic sense. And that is where, me realizing, I think the first way I realized that it is a universal language is when I started experiencing a lot of synchronicities. We all have probably experienced, people that are on your viewership here, seeing the same number series over and over again. Have you ever experienced that?
Yeah.
How often do you experience that?
Oh, geez. Honestly, for the past 2 months, I've been experiencing a massive amount of synchronicities beyond just numbers. I mean, I'm talking like dates aligning with, it's been crazy. Right? All the time. Yeah.
And so numbers are usually the first thing that people start noticing, right? As like repeating, I'll see a license plate. It's like, well, 111, or I'll see 111 somewhere else, or the clock. Every time I wake up in the middle of the night, it's 4:44. Right, exactly.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And people report that all the time. And actually, this is a phenomenon that was very well documented by Carl Jung, the famous psychologist and alchemist, by the way. And he calls them synchronicities, right? These synchronicities are actually the mechanism through which your subconscious mind is speaking to your conscious mind. It's the language that it uses. And as you start piecing that together more and more, you'll realize, well, if that is the language that the subconscious is using to speak to my conscious mind, it's like there's a veil where they can't communicate with each other. They want to, like, we've created this extreme separation. And then all of a sudden your subconscious says, hey, I'm still here, right? Don't forget about me, right? I'm your shadow. And in Carl Jung psychology, that's called, for a woman, it's called the animus. And for a man, it's called the anima. Now, last night I had dinner with some people from, they were trying to get me onto a show called The Real Indiana Jones, right? And one of the guys that was there pitching me last night, fantastic person, he brought his fiance. And his fiance is pretty young. She's like 27 years old, beautiful gal. And she's an equestrian. So she likes to ride horses and she does like horse jumping. And so I asked her, what's the name of your horse? And she shows me the horse. It's kind of a dark brown, blackish horse, really beautiful horse. 16 and a half hands high, big horse. And she says, oh, the name of my horse, I didn't get to choose the name, but the name was chosen already when I bought the horse. I said, what was the name? She said, Animus. Hmm. And I immediately was like, oh, synchronicity. Right? First of all, I've never heard of a horse with the name of Animus.
Yeah, yeah.
But Animus represents the shadow for women. It's a male figure. And so when I explained this to her, I said, you know what, this actually is probably a representation of a symbology to you of, you've got this other side of your personality that is your masculine side. And everyone has masculine and feminine energy, right? It's balanced. It has to be. Everything in the universe is balanced. For every action, there must be an equal opposite reaction, right? That's why we have an equal number of Republicans and an equal number of Democrats. And elections are won and lost based on that 1% in the middle, right? And usually it's an anger factor, right? One way or the other. If the Democrats are more angry, then more people go out and vote. If the Republicans are more angry, then more people go out and vote. And it's just this pendulum swing. And I just sit back and laugh at it because it's now ridiculous, right? It's just funny. But when I said to her last night that the animus and the horse represents this free spirit, and this horse is kept in, it's stable, and it's representing how you are keeping that aspect of your life, that other side of yourself, in the stable, right? When actually it wants to run free. And her face just went white. And she was like, oh my gosh, like I just, uncovered her, right? Mm-hmm. Or exposed her in a way. And we all have this, for men, it's the anima, right? It's this representation of the moon. And this comes back to alchemical study, right? And Hermeticism, which a lot of people stop with Carl Jung at the psychology, but they don't go into his great life's work, which was Hermeticism. A lot of people stop with Isaac Newton and don't go beyond the science that we learned in school, which is on gravitation and inverse square law and stuff like that, when 80% of his life work was actually alchemical and hermetic, right? And same thing with Leonardo da Vinci, by the way. Every one of the polymaths were all hermeticists, without exception. It's a path that you are drawn to as you start to merge with your shadow, as you start to learn to merge with your shadow. And it's about learning to balance your brain. If you're going into one segment of science, pure physics, for example, you will hinder your ability to learn more physics. This is part of the way this works. The only way you can learn more physics is when you start to branch out into the connectivity to music, to art, to mathematics, to philosophy, and spirituality. The doorway to higher learning is all through spirituality. It is not, we think that science and spirituality have to be separate. No, the path to higher science is actually spirituality. That's the portal, because there's an Akashic field. We think that our thoughts are inside our brains. They're not. Looking for, and this is one of the quotes by my friend Nassim, looking for thoughts inside the brain is like looking for the radio announcer inside the radio box. It's not there. Your thoughts, when they come into your mind, are actually from a field around you. And science today is starting to finally realize this, because they know that when you've got certain brain centers that do certain autonomic functions of the body, right? The things that you're not thinking about, breathing, for example. If all of a sudden that part of your brain gets destroyed, right? Or experiences some infarction or necrosis or something, then all of a sudden, through neuroplasticity, the ability to do that goes to another side of your brain. Well, how is that even possible, right? It's possible because the thoughts and this whole process is not actually inside your brain. It's not there, it's a field. So you can think of it more like cloud computing in a sense, right? And so from that context, we start to look at alchemy in a different light, right? We come here to experience this duality, to learn and perceive our way back, to overcome our karmic loops, right? Those things that we keep experiencing over and over and over again, those patterns that start out like synchronicities, and then we start realizing that they're macro patterns, the cycles that we see in our life, until we finally transmute them through accepting them. It's through accepting them that we actually learn to transcend beyond them or transcend through them by loving and accepting the experience, because the higher self knows what you need. And that to me is, where there's a merger of science and spirituality. It's not the other way around. So actually what you need to do to be able to tap into this field, so think of our minds as more like a radio receiver. And right now the big expression that's coming is and the shift is coming, is that the heart and mind are merging, right? The heart and mind, this is the balance of the masculine and feminine. It's not just about the feminine rising. The masculine and feminine together rise as the feminine rises. As we merge with the anima, as we merge with our animus. And when those two things come together into one whole, it's the most powerful thing you can experience. And, I think that's what Hermeticism is actually pointing to. It's all about finding that balance. And the way you get to higher learning in science is to follow your mind as a spiral, so that you're not just going to go, I'm going to go physics, deep into physics. That's not how you discover new physics. You discover new physics by broadening your perspective. You discover new things, new applications by connecting dots across all these different aspects. And all of it comes back to one math constant, which is phi, Fibonacci. It is all about that. And you can even say that the Fibonacci symbol, which I'll just draw for you here, is actually the brain. Left and right halves merging into one. This is the left and right lobe. It's the masculine and feminine. For right-handed people, the left brain is the logic center. It's the part of your brain that tells you, no, don't do it, don't take the risk. It's the part of your brain that controls mathematics. It's part of the brain that controls science and the scientific method. And it's the side of your brain that literally says no to most of the things that you're thinking you might want to do. And then the other side, the creative side, the feminine side, is wilder. It's got more emotion associated with it. It's got like a splash of color all through it, right? It's not just binary code. But what is powerful is when those two halves of the brain come together as one, and merges also with the heart. That emotional aspect, when you merge with the left brain merges with the right brain across the corpus callosum, it cannot help but also merge with the heart brain. And there are actually nerves inside the heart that mimic the brain. So you start thinking with your heart in addition to being able to think with your brain. Or rather, instead of think, how about receive, right? Like a radio receiver. Mm-hmm. The way you attenuate, the way you get that signal straight is by balancing, having experiences that are broad, making sure that you're not only thinking about physics all day or mathematics all day, because if I only did mathematics all day, that wouldn't work either. If I only did music all day, that doesn't work either. Looking and realizing that everything is connected, just as Da Vinci said to us, right? To achieve the complete mind, study the art of science, study the science of art. One side of the brain is art, the other side of the brain is science. It's that simple. And once we realize that, then we can tap in to this higher understanding and knowledge. Mm-hmm. And it's so fascinating because that's what Isaac Newton did. That's what Rene Descartes did. That's what, all the people throughout history, the philosophers, Plato, Socrates, they all spent time in Egypt too. They all go to Egypt.
Yeah, I was about to give a good segue into Egyptology a little bit and ancient Egypt, because they, in large part, really did understand the heart. I would say much more than we've come to. It's almost like over the centuries now we've suddenly attributed more value to the thinking mind than the heart, and we don't think that the heart has such immense power, which it truly does. So, did you notice during your trip to Egypt that did you encounter anyone that really had any philosophies around the value of the heart, I guess you could say, or how it plays a role in ancient Egypt?
Absolutely. It is fascinating because, I remember the night. So the whole week in 2018, before I went to Egypt by myself, I was with a group of CEOs and we went to Israel for a week. And I was kind of following this whole alchemical path and journey that I teach on my courses on resonance. And the whole week was seeing the symbology of the Merkaba, because I'm in Israel, which is Star of David, right? And that is the merger of masculine and feminine. It's very ancient symbology. And so as I went through Israel, and while I was drawing in my notebook that week, and it was an incredibly spiritual experience for me, I kept drawing the sacred geometry of the letters Alpha Omega. And I didn't know why. Now, I knew I was going to spend the night in the pyramid. I've actually spent 5 nights in the pyramid now. I think I've done it more than anybody I know. Maybe there's people that have done it more, but they actually gave me the key to the pyramid last time I was there.
You stayed enough, you can have the key.
It's just like the concierge key, right? I get the concierge key to the pyramid. I actually have a picture of me holding the key and then unlocking the pyramid, which was pretty cool. But, it was interesting for me because I drew this Alpha Omega like 20 times during this week, and I was kind of obsessed with it. I didn't even know why I kept being obsessed with it. And I knew I was going to be going to the pyramid on May 7th. And, the night before, I was in Israel still, and we had a dinner with the group inside Zedekiah's cave, which is underneath the Dome of the Rock. So Zedekiah's cave is where the Ark of the Covenant was supposedly hidden for over 1,000 years from the Bible. And I hadn't planned to be there. I didn't even know the schedule. It was a secret schedule the entire time. One of my best friends set it up, and he's Israeli, and his name is Boaz. As in like Boaz and Jachin, the 2 pillars of the alchemy and Hermetic wisdom that you also find on the tarot cards as well, behind the Hierophant. And my friend Boaz set up the whole trip and everything. He does a great job. We did it in 2007. We did it again this time. It was a very different trip this time. It was very spiritually oriented. But as I was in this cave, I was like, whoa, this is Zedekiah's cave. Like, no one gets to go in this place. This is like super rare to be in here. And they had this beautiful candelabra dinner set up. I mean, a harpist in the background. And, it was like this really, really swank event. Well, I was the chairman of the group. And so I had to give a little speech that night. It was the last night we were going to be in Israel. We'd had an epic week. We went to Syria. We did all kinds of stuff. I mean, it was a really, really cool week. All got baptized in the River Jordan. And it wasn't religious. It was just like, oh, here we are, River Jordan. You want to get baptized? Of course, why not, right?
Yeah.
And so I kind of said, where's the bathroom in this place, in this cave, right? And I'm like, I need to prepare my remarks, type of thing. And I, of course, didn't go to the bathroom, but I jumped the rope and went deep into the cave, snuck into the cave. And there are like do not enter signs everywhere and everything. And of course, I was in pitch black darkness because I didn't want to be seen. And then as I got probably 200 feet into the cave, I turned my iPhone flashlight on because at some point I was kind of getting scared too. It was really dark. And I kept walking inside this cave, and I walked probably maybe another 1,000 feet or so deep into this cave. And I was looking for the spot. I was just trying to follow my heart as to where might the Ark of the Covenant have been hidden, right? And I find the end of the cave, and I find this mound of quartz crystal. So all the stone in there was limestone. That's what was used to quarry the stone for the stone that was used to build Solomon's temple as well as major chunks of Herod's temple after that, after Solomon's temple was destroyed in about 600 BC by Nebuchadnezzar, right, when he came and took Israel captive. And so I find this spot with this mound of crystal, which was bizarre because the rest of the cave was not like that at all. And it was probably 10 feet in diameter, I would say. And it had steps and like an altar, right? And so I was like looking at this and I looked down. I got all of this on video, in fact, and if you look on my Instagram page, you can find this video somewhere along the way. And I look down and I see carved into the floor of this cave 2 letters, Alpha, Omega. So I'm like, whoa, that's kind of weird, right? And so something was special about that moment. Well, I didn't know this, but on that very night, every year since 1848 up until 1948, when Israel was formed as a nation, so for 100 years, the Royal Arch Freemasons stand on that very spot to celebrate the Ark of the Covenant. On that exact same day at 6 p.m., right? So it was now late at night, and it was, you know, late in the evening that I was there. And it was going to be in the next 24 hours that they were going to have that Royal Arch Freemason. They stopped from 1948 until 1969 when they started up again, because it's actually this plot of land is not part of Israel. Technically, it's part of Jordan. It's in Jordan. And so the Israel government wasn't allowing people to do it because there was, you know, 6-day war stuff all going on. It was like back in that very, very tumultuous time. And on that very spot, right, is where they stand to celebrate the Ark of the Covenant every year, which I found on a reference in Wikipedia, shockingly, about 6 months after I had been there doing that. Well, the next night I go to Egypt, and I'm taking 12 of my friends with me. So lots of CEO guys also, they're just buddies of mine. And we go into the king's chamber, and literally the first guy lays down in the sarcophagus because I wanted them all to experience that because I'd done it already. And they find the resonance frequency, and it's exactly 117 hertz, which is 432 hertz tuning, right? And it's a letter, it's an A sharp. So you can do any note in the triplet, right, of that F sharp major chord. So F sharp major chord would be F sharp, A sharp, C sharp, F sharp, right? And then you could do it in 5-part harmony as well, but you can't do that with your voice. But if you just do an ohm chant at that exact resonance frequency of 117 hertz, and it would be, you know, you take it up a few octaves, it would be, you know, 234 and 468. That's part of the 432 tuning, right? And they're adding up to a digital root of 9. Then the chamber starts to make this noise. Right when you find that frequency, it goes wah, 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 loud, like really loud. And you're laying inside there and you can feel this electromagnetic kind of wave coming over you, right? And I had done that before, but I had not done it for, you know, the night that I was there. This night, I spent 2 nights in the pyramid, and the second night I spent 4 hours in that box, in the stone box. But the first time I was there, I was looking down at my friend who was laying in there doing it because I wanted him to experience it. And I looked down at the edge of the sarcophagus, I see an Alpha Omega on the edge of the sarcophagus. And I knew that famously the pyramid had never had any writing or hieroglyphics in it. So how in the hell is it that I'm randomly seeing Alpha Omega on the rim of the pyramid? I mean, the odds of that are just ridiculous. And I'd been drawing it in my notebook all week. It had been in my consciousness all week. And so I was like, wow. So I grabbed the 2 Egyptologists that were with us. Actually, there were 4. And I said, have you guys seen this before? And they're like, did you make this? And I go, yeah, I chipped it out just now.
I was about to say, yeah, you chiseled it. Yeah.
Yeah,
when
totally.
You weren't looking.
This is rose granite, okay? Rose granite is a very special kind of granite because it is a very high percentage of quartz in that granite, rose quartz. Now, rose quartz has a piezoelectric quality. That's why it's used in, you know, pacemakers to do things that are like piezoelectric crystals, right, that are inside. And they can carry charge with motion, right, with vibration. They carry charge. So it's an electric chamber, right? I don't believe for a moment that anyone was ever a mummy inside that sarcophagus. Not for a moment. So I experienced this while I'm there, and these guys are like, did you chip this out? And I'm like, no, come on, you guys checked me. I had no tools coming in, except I had a laser measure system, right? Because Alan Green, a partner of mine now, asked me to measure the chamber because he found some mathematical relationships in it that were very profound, that relate to the separation of light and darkness, which that separation between blue, pale blue, and gold is actually based on a math constant called alpha, which is alpha 137 or 1 over 137, right? And it's the 33rd prime number. And that's a threshold energy value that either determines whether a electron will emit a photon or absorb a photon. Right? It's exactly a mirror. Think of 137 as the mirror, right? And even the Hebrew symbol of Yahweh, right, which you may have seen before, which looks, like this.
I was actually going to ask you about that in its relation to the actual pyramid itself, right?
Right, you see Yahweh right there?
Yeah.
And it's right backwards, right? So it's Yod, He, Vav, He. I looked at that and I said, wait a minute, that's a math equation. Pi times 7 and pi to the 7th power.
Mm-hmm.
You see it?
Yeah.
And so I did the math on that. And when you take pi to the 7th power, it's 3,020. That happens to be the exact perimeter in feet of the Great Pyramid. And the pi times 7 is 22. So 3,020 divided by 22 equals 137. Right? Which is, whoa. So
yeah.
Hebrew is actually a math equation? Are you joking me? Right? Kind of bizarre, right? And the name is alpha, which is I'm alpha omega, right? And so as I kind of was measuring all this, I found that it was exactly 31.4 inches from the edge of the sarcophagus, which is pi times 10. And the width of the alpha omega was exactly 5.605 inches, which 5.605 squared is pi times 10. And all the mathematical proportions of those two letters were matching perfectly the math constants and proportionality of the Great Pyramid itself, as if they were left by the builder. Because whoever left those markings had the knowledge of what went into building the pyramid, without a doubt. The math is unequivocal. It was there. And so as I looked at that and I experienced that, I thought, wow, this whole Egypt thing is special, right? There's something special about Egypt. Every polymath has gone there. And I was like, why hasn't Da Vinci gone there? Da Vinci clearly, probably the world's most famous polymath of all polymaths. And why didn't he go there? So I started looking in these books, and I was at the Vatican giving a speech in May last year, speaking at a conference called Humanity 2.0. And I was talking about prime numbers and the prime number discovery. Now, it's interesting. That's why I got invited to meet with the Dalai Lama as well, because when you find a pattern to something that's not supposed to have a pattern, then everybody on the spiritual side of the equation starts saying, hey, that's showing this divine hand, right? Because pattern where there's not supposed to be pattern means that there's intelligent design, right?
Yeah, certainly not by accident. Yeah.
Certainly not by accident. And so when I was at the Vatican, I went to the Da Vinci Museum and I found this book. It's this big. It's literally weighs 60 pounds. And the book is called the Codex Atlantico. It cost a freaking fortune. And I bought it and had it mailed back, right? And inside this book, it's all Da Vinci's notes. And they're 1,200 or so pages, but it's on parchment paper and it's got explanations for each page. I mean, it's a lot of work that Da Vinci did. And so I found this one letter that is never referenced anywhere, or very seldomly referenced. And I even read the autobiography, or rather the biography by Walter Isaacson on Da Vinci's life. And there were 4 years of Da Vinci's life that were missing from history, 1482 to 1486. And so I was really trying to find out where he went during that time. And there was one obscure reference I found on the internet saying, what is this thing that Da Vinci went into this cave? And, he faced his shadow in this cave type of thing. And I was like, that's interesting. So let me see if I can find that. Well, I find this letter inside this Codex Atlantico that is written as a draft letter And it's titled To the Devatdar of the Sultan of Cairo, Babylon. I'm like, okay, wait a minute. Da Vinci's writing a letter to somebody that's working for the Sultan of Cairo? And historians believe that it's all fiction. Why would he write a draft letter in fiction? Doesn't really make sense. So I started digging deeper into it. Now, the ancient name of the Giza Plateau is Ros Tau, the rose Tau, right? Tau as in the Greek letter. And Taurus, the bull, right, in Greek is Tauros, Tauros. And so literally Ros Tau is backwards. And that's where the word Rosicrucian comes from, because Tau is a reference, it's the letter T. It's also a reference to a cross, right? So Rose Cross, Rosicrucian, right? Now, Da Vinci was a Rosicrucian as well. If you go on the AMORC website for Rosicrucians, you'll find that they have reference to Da Vinci right on there. They claim him as one of their, Renaissance founders. And so I was like, okay, this is interesting. So I'm looking at this letter now to this Devatdar. And what I find is that he gives a very detailed account of his travel and sojourn to Egypt. And then he says, and then we finally arrived in Egypt. We finally arrived in Cairo. And I'm like, what the? This is not anywhere in any other books about Da Vinci. And it's right here in a letter, undisputed, to be written by his hand. So clearly Da Vinci went to Egypt. So my mind is racing now, right? Because this is just over Christmas. And I'm like, wow, this is fascinating. So I start reading the rest. And in this letter, he describes his survey that he had conducted on this project for the Sultan of Cairo. And the Sultan of Cairo at that time was a fellow by the name of Kate Bey. He's a famous philosopher king of the Mamluk sultans, okay, who were these bodyguard class of people that got control of their country. And this guy turned out to be a philosopher king of bodyguards, I guess. And that's the word they use. Bodyguards is what Mamluk means. And they fought against the Ottomans, right, the Ottoman Empire. And so I'm like following all this stuff, and he tells this whole story about going and surveying the mountains that he referred to as the Taurus Mountains. The Taurus Mountains. In fact, he refers to it as the Taurus Mountain. So the Bull Mountain. And he says in his description that the Taurus Mountain is as high as it touches the sky, that there are 3 peaks of this Taurus Mountain, that it is white and glimmering limestone, and that it has exactly orientation pointing due north, because he actually describes and says that on one side of the pyramid from daytime up until noon, it has an equal amount of light on both sides. So that means the only way that can happen on the east and west side is if it's pointed due north, right? And he's talking about the shadow and how far the shadow is cast. It's like lots of detail. Then he goes into detail talking about the cavern inside this Taurus Mountain, which by now I'm looking at this saying, this is clearly an encryption for Ros Tau Mountain, which is the Bull Mountain, because the entryway into the Great Pyramid is the Apis chevrons, right? The Apis chevrons are the representation of the bull, of the cow. And so I'm like, oh, this is really interesting, right? And I knew that the Apis bull is represented by the letter A. And I knew also that the Hathor in Egyptian myth is represented by the omega, because if you see the Egyptian Hathor myth pictures, you'll see Hathor has hair that's shaped like the omega, right? Literally shaped like the omega symbol. And so I'm finding all these references, and then I look at the Last Supper by Da Vinci, and I noticed that the dimensions of the room of the Last Supper match perfectly the dimensions of the King's Chamber in the Great Pyramid. And I'm like, whoa. And there's an altar right in front of the table that everyone's always been, what is that thing, right, at the Last Supper? And when you overlay the picture of the King's Chamber on top of that and match the walls and everything to it, the sarcophagus lands right in the center of that. So I'm like, whoa, that's really unbelievable. Then I noticed that in the Last Supper, there's like a bull and a cow painted into the wall, right? I notice an Eye of Ra on the back, and literally this is all unfolding. I'm posting all this stuff while I'm in Egypt with a group of 50 people, and I'm posting all of it real time as I'm getting it, like literally within minutes of getting it. Okay, you know, what do you guys see? And I'm asking people to help me. Do you see something more in this? And it was really cool watching the crowdsourcing of sort of decrypting this mystery, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I did see, I saw some of those posts actually, and I did see some of the comments and people really getting into it. It was really good, yeah.
Yeah, and so then I'm thinking, oh my gosh, if we can see this stuff now and use this as a cipher for the King's Chamber, what can we find when we get in the King's Chamber? Well, guess what? The right wall that we were in the King's Chamber, when you're looking at the back wall and you got the sarcophagus in front of you, has a 7.5-foot stone relief of a cow, Hathor, and the Apis bull that sacrificed itself within it, which represents the merger of masculine and feminine and represents the merger of the heart brain. And it is represented by the Alpha Omega on the rim of the sarcophagus. In fact, I think I have this video. I can even show it to you if you guys see it. Let's see if I can find this here. First of all, here's the picture of the wall. And here is the Hathor. Can you see this?
Yeah, yeah.
Here's the Hathor, and you can see the eye, right, of this cow right here. And this is its horn. It's like a profile. Now, granted, this is probably at least, I believe, 13,000 years old, if not more. Okay, so you could see the head, the bull's head. Then you could see the Apis bull, the male bull, inside the Hathor, where you can see the horns right here. This is the head, right? Comes down to its legs, comes down here in its back, and it's even got a tail right here, comes across, and it's all encompassed within this very large Hathor. And there's even writing on the wall up here that you can see very faintly. And it looks like something between Hebrew and Urdu. And we're trying to get this analyzed right now. But I can probably show you this video. Now, this is a picture of the Alpha Omega on the rim of the sarcophagus. It had never been seen by anyone before. Right here.
Yeah.
You see it?
So now, do you think these things had been just withered by time, or do you think that they've actually been tampered with by people?
Obviously, we looked at the notion that maybe it's like graffiti or something, but these are so old that, first of all, I don't see how it could be graffiti. First, this relief of the cow and the bull had just never been seen because people weren't looking for it that way. I was looking for it to match it up against the Last Supper, and my wife is the one who actually found it, not me. I was busy working on the sarcophagus. But actually, here's the video. Let's see if we can play this. Discovery. Go ahead. Well, we just found something else here in the King's Chamber. And then we realized that, there was actually a larger cow around it because she hadn't even seen that yet. And you can see the eye right here. It matched exactly what was on the right wall of the Last Supper. It was astounding. And so, it's almost as if the texture of this is also burned. It's like it's burned into the wall.
Yeah.
The texture is very subtle. It reminds me of, I don't know if you've seen the picture of the Flower of Life in Abydos. Which is burned into the Osirian temple up high on one of the columns. And it's like that. And that's what it feels like. So that night, using this kind of Da Vinci encryption of the Last Supper, we were able to find literally 8 new reliefs inside the Great Pyramid. Now, this here is where we saw the cow. So there's a cow. You see the horns. I'm going to trace it with my hand here. And you can see the head of the cow. and the eyes, and then these are the nostrils right here, and then the ridge of the back of the cow going along here. So it's a very clearly defined ridge right along this, but of course it's subtle because it's encrypted, right? It's supposed to be subtle. And then we started noticing here as well this Eye of Ra. And we found the Eye of Ra also in the exact same location on the back wall in the Great Pyramid. Now, Da Vinci had reference going into this cavern and describing it literally perfectly to the way that it is. You know, he even says that he had to crouch down and put his hand on one of his knees and wobble back and forth to get in, because there's about a 20-foot passageway you've got to go through to get into the king's chamber, where it's only 38 inches high, 39 inches high. So it's like that's the height of a bar, right? So you're kind of like hunched over, going back and forth to get inside the king's chamber. And, you know, when you look at this picture, you can see the eye. It's shaped like it's got an iris, but it also has a slit for a pupil, pointing to the fact that it's more like a lion or a cat. And then it's got eyelashes here that he even drew on the pediment, right? And of course, the iris is also off center. It's not at the center of the window, which is what you would think if it's a window pediment. And rather, it's on the center right above the eye of Jesus.
Mm-hmm.
Right? And Jesus represents the sun, or Ra. And this is the Eye of Ra. Now, what we found is that there's so much more writing on this back wall that nobody's ever seen. We're seeing numbers here as well. You can see the letter A right here, right? You can see ER right above it, right here. All of these things that you see are actually all writing. I don't know how good the resolution is for you, because, you know, it's not as good when
I can see it pretty clearly, yeah.
You can even trace the back of a profile of a lion, which we believe represents the Sphinx right here. So this is the mane of the lion. This is the nose of the lion. This is its back. We find also tons of other letters, the letter A showing up right here. And when you start looking at the distances, so from this side of Mary Magdalene to here versus this distance from here to here, the width of Jesus, it's exactly a phi relationship, precisely. And it's alpha and omega, represented again. It is the merger of this masculine and feminine. And we found so much stuff. Here's the Holy Grail as well. And when you overlay the pictures, the sarcophagus ends up right inside this box right here, which looks like out of place, because, like, why is it painted this matte color? It doesn't really make sense, right?
Yeah.
So we found so many things, and we found eyes looking through the slats, right, or the grates of the ceiling, also, like tons of eyes looking down. And so as we went through this process, we found lots of other stuff. And then I found, you know, that there was a connection as well to Anne Boleyn, which this is now starting to become more and more believed to be a portrait of Anne Boleyn, who was the mother of Queen Elizabeth. She lived with Da Vinci the last 3 years of Da Vinci's life in the King of France's home in Chateau d'Amboise. And I found here an Eye of Horus in the background of her painting, which, you know, was very clear for me to see. And then someone else pointed out and said, well, I see what looks like a lion nose and part of the other eye on the other side, and like a lion mouth here as well. And then even this squiggly over here, which would tie to the medulla oblongata, which is that piece of the Eye of Horus that comes off because it's a representation of part of the brain, right? And so we found these 8 different reliefs. This one, obviously, the bull was the most significant, but, you know, we found others like this one as well. There you go. So move the red light around a bit. Move it around slowly in a circle. If you focus your eye in the center right here, you can see radial lines coming out and linear lines as well. So this is right on the side of the sarcophagus.
Hmm. So now with all this in mind, what do you think was the use or purpose of the sarcophagus?
I think it's about spiritual enlightenment and ascension.
Yeah, it almost seems like, based on what you're describing, it almost seems like it would assist with some form of astral projection in a way. It's almost like, it reminds me of like a float tank, but it has more of those sound frequencies and whatnot involved in a float tank, which is just silence and stillness. But it almost seems like a way that someone could do some form of projection, out of body projection. So science is something that's like, it doesn't catch up with anything when it comes to, astral, spiritual, out of body, metaphysics. It doesn't really touch on any of that stuff. So, it's fun for me to, at least as a thought experiment, to think that could be one of its uses. I mean, what's your take on that?
I've not shared this before. So this is the first for me to talk about it, but I experienced that myself.
Mm.
When I spent about 4 hours in the sarcophagus. I've shared it with other individuals, but not in a broad way like this. I laid in the sarcophagus, I found the resonance frequency. And what's interesting is that when you stop to take a breath, right, because you can't just keep oming without taking a breath, your body gets into this autonomic response. Just like breathing, you don't have to think about breathing. When I was in there, I didn't have to think about om chanting.
Mm.
And you heard in the background, people were om chanting in there. They were trying to find the exact resonance frequency so that I could say what I said to you, which is 117 hertz. But interestingly, the guy that was outside the King's Chamber, he could hear me because the entire pyramid is like a big speaker. I mean, literally, you can hear people when they're in that chamber. If you get quiet enough outside, it resonates through this giant 13-acre structure, right? And I was doing this, just going, and it's the sound of a cow. You just go, like a mooing sound, right? And you just find that frequency and it makes that whoa, 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 whoa. And it continues to resonate while you take your next breath because it continues to reverberate, right? And the exact length of time to take the next breath, you start over again, and it never breaks the resonance frequency.
Mm.
So you get into this kind of om chant meditation process, and you lay there, and all of a sudden, I personally experienced an out-of-body experience. I found myself on the ceiling looking down at myself. And then I experienced an incredible astral journey, right? That was something I don't really share with people, but it was very real. And I went all around for about 3 hours, various parts of the Orion spur of the galaxy. And I experienced that.
Mm-hmm.
And I even had, a guide helping along the way. I believe that the Great Pyramid is about spiritual ascension and merging the Ka and Ba of Merkaba. I fundamentally believe also that the pyramid helps us when we're ready, because we've learned true self-acceptance. The world is not tough, as I said already. It's not tough because people don't like each other. It's become tough because people don't like themselves. It's not the sin that makes the world bad or difficult or full of struggle or suffering. It's the shame. It's the shame. You go back to Adam and Eve, right?
Mm.
In the Garden of Eden, Adam, he's kind of left alone for a while, and God comes back and he says, Adam, where art thou? And Adam says, he's hiding because he's ashamed. And the Bible says Adam was ashamed and he covered himself, right? Because he felt that he was naked.
Mm. Yeah.
And so God says to him, what have you done? And Adam says, the woman that you gave me and commanded that I remain with, she gave me of the fruit of the tree of knowledge of good and evil, and I did eat. She gave me of the knowledge of duality, and I ate. So then God says, Eve, what have you done? And Eve says, the serpent beguiled me, and I did eat. Now, I find it interesting that the first moment that shame comes into a reference in this ancient text, whether you believe it as scripture or whether you believe it not as scripture, just looking at it as a piece of prose, right? One of the oldest pieces of prose on the planet. The very first reference to shame is accompanied by a reference to blame. So is it true that it was really Eve that did it, or was it this joint thing between them? Who knows? That was his perspective, right? And we cannot feel shame. Shame is such a low frequency vibration. It's probably the lowest of frequency vibrations. And when we experience that, we have to punt it. We have to get it out of our realm, and we deny it so deeply, even its very existence cannot be there. And that is what creates this karmic loop.
Mm-hmm.
The shame that we build up becomes very dense. It becomes dark matter for us, right? We're carrying it around with us. And we ultimately, when we've come to the zenith of our separation in the middle of our lives, we ultimately are the only ones that can't even perceive it. Everyone else can see this gigantic shame that you're basically carrying as a burden, but no one themselves can see it until they finally learn to love it. They learn to integrate it. You know, Carl Jung said that enlightenment is not found by illuminating the light of your life. You know, we all say love and light, right? That's kind of the new age way to say fuck you, right? Love and light.
Yeah, like
right?
a namaste. Yeah.
Namaste. Yeah, namaste,
Yeah.
motherfucker, right? Type of thing. The interesting thing is that we cannot find our enlightenment until we make the darkness conscious.
Mm-hmm.
And if you think about the universe itself, the part of the universe that we don't understand is vacuum. Maybe that's just the giant shadow. Maybe that's just the part of ourselves. Maybe it's the it's me that is time. Time is spelled T-I-M-E. I often look at that and go, that's interesting. It, me. Okay.
Yeah.
The time itself, the darkness, the dark matter, the things that we cannot perceive, that are outside of our vision, that are outside of our scope of view, maybe because we choose not to see.
Mm-hmm.
Those are the things, once we make those things conscious and our own shadows conscious, that's when we transmute and we heal. And then that is the readiness that occurs through the alchemical process. That's the readiness that occurs with Hermeticism.
Mm-hmm.
And as we come prepared with that mindset to the King's Chamber and to the Great Pyramid, and there's no religion. You don't have to pay anybody for this. There's no religion. There's no control. There's no more, like knowledge is power bullshit. That's gone. That's yesterday. That's last year. That's last aeon, right? No more separation, the two fish swimming opposite directions, right? It's all one. And everybody has it within their power to see and heal and love themselves through self-acceptance. I gave a TED Talk in 2013 called Beautiful Minds Are Free from Fear. And in that TED Talk, I put forward a kind of basic, simple prescription of whenever I feel fearful, I try to replace that feeling with gratitude. That I'm even grateful for the suffering. I'm grateful for the difficulty because I'm learning. And somehow I cannot feel grateful and fearful at the same time anymore.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know why that is. Maybe other people can, but I certainly cannot. I haven't experienced that.
Mm-hmm.
And so when I give my next TED Talk, though, I think the next level is to replace judgment with acceptance. Learning to accept yourself wholly and truly love yourself means loving everybody else. It doesn't mean that you have to love the things that you don't like that they do, right? I mean, you can still say, oh, I don't necessarily agree with that. Or, if somebody is like a jerk to you on Instagram or whatever, or they're mean to other people or whatever, you can still love them and block them, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Right? It's all your perception.
Mm-hmm.
And what is the world without our own perspective and perception? One of the things that I do a lot of now is I draw the Merkaba. And as I draw that Merkaba and with intention, and people ask me all the time, why don't you do it on computer? Can't you use a computer program? Yes, I can use a computer program. And
Yeah.
I've done many on computer, but I don't get the benefit. I even said this to Alan Green. I'm like, Alan, I wish you would draw this stuff because your pattern recognition will go through the roof.
Mm-hmm.
And pattern recognition is being able to recognize the divine.
It really ties in with calligraphy as well, and the beauty of an art of just simply drawing something out. Yeah.
You know, in China, when I lived in Korea, 25 years ago, 30 years ago, when I was in college, I was taking a classical Chinese class. And I was doing what's called boot gulshi, which is like drawing with those big, like, you know, those big brushes. And you're drawing these Chinese characters and everything. Well, it's funny because I got one framed. It's downstairs in my office, and I've had it for 25, 30 years. I don't remember how long. And I didn't even know what it was that I'd written because it wasn't important to me then. I just found a script that I thought looked cool in ancient text. And it was mixed classical Chinese and ancient Korean. And so I was like reading a book one day, like a couple years ago, and I'm like reading the I Ching. And I turn the page and I see that exact image. And I'm like, holy shit, are you kidding me? That's what I drew when I was in college 30 years ago. And it's sitting on my wall downstairs, right? I had no idea even the significance or the importance.
That's that past connecting with the future thing, you know, it's beautiful, yeah.
I had no clue. And, you know, this happens in life all the time. And as we connect with that other side, then we start seeing all the dots connecting, right? And people ask me also, you know, have you tried ayahuasca? No, I haven't felt the need to yet. I've not done.
I'm just going to interject there and say you're on a trip, you know, without the need for the drugs and the substances. You know, what you describe and what you know, allude to is I've done a lot of substances, and just to use that as a reference point for myself, I like to do them because then I have a reference point of what's real. You know, it's really strange because then when I'm not on the substances, I'm like, okay, so this is the illusory world that we're now walking through. When I'm on the substances, I'm like, there's more. It just seems more truthful to me in what I'm seeing and what I'm experiencing intuitively and feeling through the heart. But what you describe is very much in line with a lot of what I've experienced on psychedelics. So it's amazing when I hear you say these things. So,
well, you know, the thing that I would really encourage people to do is when you draw the Merkaba, and inside that you make what's called Metatron's cube, right? And then you start connecting lines from each point of the six-pointed star to the center of where there's a new hexagon that's formed inside of it. And that will give you lines of perspective and dimension. And you keep doing that continually. And I'll be doing a series on this. I did a post on it just a couple days ago. But as you keep doing that, it looks like a mess of lines. Like legit, it looks like a mess of lines. And you could look at that and see nothing inside of it. Or you could look at that and see everything inside of it. So some people will look at the mess of lines, and I'll ask them, I'm like, hey, what do you see when you look at this mess of lines? They've got all these dimensional lines. It just looks like a ton of lines. And they're like, some guy's like, I don't see anything, bro. I'm like, oh, okay. I asked someone else, what do you see? I see a cube. I see a cube inside there. I can see that if I bold like some of these lines, I can make a perfect cube. Okay. What else do you see? Maybe I see a tetrahedron. So people that are knowledgeable in geometry. Then I go to some people that are really knowledgeable in geometry, and they'll see like all the platonic solids, right? Then I go to people that are like beyond that, and they'll see 30 or 40 different geometries, some of which have never even been discovered before. The degree to which you can pull out and then bold. And that's what I do when I do discovery of geometry. I'm just bolding the lines. I'm not adding a single line. I'm just bolding the lines that would form a new geometrical shape or pattern. Now, people would look at that and say, wait a minute, those lines look random, right? It's a mess. And they might look at it, if they looked at it and use it as a metaphor for the universe, might say, that's entropy. Or you might look at it and say, well, wait a minute, maybe entropy is just not being able to differentiate one or two patterns from a sea of pattern because it's so patterned.
Mm-hmm.
Even pi itself, that's an irrational number. I make a random number generator. Okay, one of the companies that I founded makes the new random number generator that uses AI and irrationality to create entropy pools. And we create the highest entropy pools. And we don't need any hardware to do it. It's all software based, which is going to be a big deal for encryption and for random number generators are used for everything. But we're the first irrational random number generator. And yet, even I will sit here and say to you, even though we meet all the randomness criteria that's established by the government and NIST and National Institute of Standards of Technology, actually, I don't believe in randomness. Randomness is simply the inability to perceive the pattern that's there, because there's always a pattern. And once you start from that mindset, then you know you've achieved a higher degree of sensation of oneness. So what I really encourage people to do is to draw this geometry and practice pulling out of this complexity, the simplicity of form, because that expands your consciousness. In fact, you could say that the higher number of shapes you're able to perceive inside that Metatron's cube, and by the way, it's infinite, the number of shapes. It literally creates all geometry that has ever been seen or ever will yet be seen. That's just intrinsic to the universe itself. The more you're able to perceive inside that, that's a barometer for your ability to communicate with the higher self. Your ability to communicate. And this is what Carl Jung refers to as the superconscious. So the superconscious is the merger of the subconscious mind and the conscious mind. You could think of it as an iceberg, right? So let's draw a little example of an iceberg here. So I've got the ocean, I've got the iceberg, and then I've got this big piece of iceberg underwater, right? Mm-hmm. Now there's a bird flying in the sky. So I'll put a little bird here. And there's sun, the sun is in the sky, and at night there's a moon, right? So sorry for my bad drawing, but yes. And there might even be a boat on the surface of the water. So now I've got a little sailboat on the surface of the water too. And let's assume that this iceberg is conscious. And its brain is up here at the top. It perceives separation from all of these things. It's in the water. Maybe there's birds that it sees or a boat on the surface, but it doesn't know anything that's under the water. But what if everything that shows up here is actually a projection for the part of the iceberg that's under the water? So conscious mind, subconscious mind, the U inverse. When you achieve oneness of those two, then you transcend to another level of consciousness while you're still here. That next level of consciousness is what Carl Jung refers to as the superconscious, where you have made the dark things conscious, that you understand and you work together. I don't know if you saw that TV show called Billions.
No, I didn't. No.
It's
with is it with The Rock or something?
No. It's a TV show that was on HBO or Showtime, excuse me. And basically, it's about this billionaire guy who has this arch nemesis, and his arch nemesis is the U.S. attorney in New York. And he's a billionaire hedge fund manager, and the arch nemesis attorney is supposed to be the good guy, but actually he's the bad guy, because he's all about just trying to make a name for himself because he wants to be a politician. And so everything that you assume is good and bad are upside down in the show. You see character traits from both of these guys that are reprehensible and very admirable too, right? Because everyone is equal parts reprehensible and equal parts admirable. So nobody's shit stinks less than anybody else's, right? I was laughing my butt off today when I was going by and I saw this meme of Corona beer and at a store, right? And it had toilet paper on top. It says 1 free roll of toilet paper with a case of Corona beer purchased, right? Yeah. And then someone says, it's wait a minute, coronavirus is a respiratory problem, right? Virus. And Corona, by the way, means crown. Corona is crown. Corona beer. Right? Interesting.
Yeah.
And so it's a respiratory problem. So why is everyone thinking they're going to like, shit themselves to death or something? There's like no toilet paper anywhere. My wife was at the store yesterday trying to buy toilet paper, and there's like no toilet paper anywhere.
Yeah.
Right? Because of the mass hysteria and fear that's going on. Well, the whole point is that when we can start to make the unconscious conscious and we merge these things together, then we have abilities that we didn't know we had.
Mm-hmm.
And you might even experience life differently. Not only, I would say you're going to end up probably quite a bit happier because like nothing bothers you at that stage.
Yeah.
Right?
Mm-hmm.
But also you're going to be loving to everybody and nothing is going to get at you. It's kind of what all the great wisdom seekers and the polymaths and all the spiritualists basically have pushed us towards, which is the very simple message of love your neighbor as yourself.
Mm-hmm.
The very simple message of judge not lest ye judge yourself.
Mm-hmm.
Love yourself and you will love your neighbor. And that's the only thing, I don't need a religion to teach me this. I don't need a cult. I don't need somebody to follow. And I certainly don't want to be that for anybody. But the message is love your neighbor as you love yourself. Love yourself as you love your neighbor. That's the message. And that's the simplicity and beauty of life. And mathematics is just a means to help expand your consciousness through being able to converse with yourself. Mathematics is a link between this part of the iceberg and this part of the iceberg. And when those two things work together, like in the show Billions, this arch nemesis, they finally decide, hey, let's join forces. And things get really fun for them because they're not battling against each other anymore.
Mm-hmm.
And usually the subconscious just wants to be acknowledged, just wants to be loved, just wants to be recognized. That's what we all have inside of us.
So I wanted to just quickly ask you, and it does relate to, I guess it ties in a lot with what we were describing here. And I was going to ask you about psychedelics, but you kind of touched on that. And I wanted to ask you specifically because what you describe about mathematics and geometry as a language of communication, especially from the unconscious mind to the conscious mind, on DMT, for instance, or on ayahuasca or any of these psychedelic drugs, people often describe when they go into these kind of lucid states or these dreamlike states that they're being communicated to through geometry. Have you ever heard stories like that from people? Like I hear it all the time. And I do believe that it is to some degree the subconscious mind communicating as best it can. Some people would say it's aliens and other entities and this and that. I don't think it's always the case. Maybe in some cases they may, encounter something, but I do believe at a base level, it is just the subconscious mind communicating as best it can and trying to get that attention and trying to, I'm here, I'm trying to help you, I'm ready, we can merge, we can join and do great things. So I just want to know if you've had any experiences, not personal experiences because you haven't had psychedelics per se, but from other people you've spoken to about that type of stuff.
First of all, I will say this. I'm not against ayahuasca or anything like that. I just haven't felt the need to do it.
Yeah, it's just a tool at the end of the day. It's just another tool.
If the opportunity arose, I can't say I wouldn't necessarily seriously consider it. And, I'm really curious about LSD in particular. I don't know why, but that one is, of all the psychedelics, I think is probably the most interesting for me to kind of explore mentally. But yes, the experience you're talking about is something I've heard from a lot of people that have done it. And believe me, people think there's just the geometry stuff I'll post sometimes. They all think that I'm like on some bender while I'm posting this stuff. I don't know.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. Like, when I look at a lot of what you'll post and what you'll, create, I look at it and I think, well, I don't think Robert's on something, but he's certainly like drawing patterns and he's, discussing things that the people that I know that are on things all the time, I don't, frequent psychedelics too often, but unless you consider like marijuana, I do that pretty frequently. But other than that, that's about it. Yeah, when I see your posts, it blows me away. And that's really why that encouraged me to reach out to you to begin with, because I think you transcend funny, we've been talking about language. I think you transcend certain barriers that language have imposed on a lot
I
of
agree
people.
with your comment on language imposing a barrier, and that's why, returning to a universal language, and maybe that language is going to be a combination of math and geometry and telepathy eventually.
Yeah.
But I think there is power in the voice also. Definitely power in the voice. And, one of the things that I came across was a mantra, I guess, that in looking at that analysis or that photograph of the King's Chamber, what's written on that wall, right? I'm like really fascinated. I want to know what was written on that wall. And I showed it to somebody and they immediately looked at it and they could read Urdu and they said it's Loka Samasta. It's Om, Loka Samasta Sukhino Bhavantu, which is an ancient Sanskrit, like estimated to be at least 7,000, 8,000 years old, statement of may all beings everywhere be happy and free. May my own happiness and freedom illuminate theirs. It's an ancient mantra. So it's Om Loka Samasta Sukhino Bhavantu. And you keep repeating that over and over again, which I thought was really, it resonated for me when this person.
That's actually, if you ever get a chance and if you're interested in it, download, or the audio is good, the Shiva Sutras. It actually it goes through, I think it's 30 some odd sutras. And that sounded a lot like one of them, which is Loka Sumari Sutkam, or something like that.
Yeah, it sounds, it's got Loka. Well, I think Loka means world.
Okay.
And, or like the universe, right? Samasta is everyone, right? Sukhino is happiness. And Bhavantu is kind of like, so let it be written, let it be done type of a thing. And, but very simple phrase. But, I think that we all of us have the ability to tap into our own natural centers for making DMT. I think some people will use psychedelics to be able to kickstart that because we got calcification on our pineal gland and all that type of stuff. So yes, I'll say this, that I do try to be mindful about what I take and ingest into my body. I recently went vegetarian, which, was not hard. I'll say this right now, not hard at all to do. I don't know, something shifted in me just not too long ago, in fact. And when I came back, I wasn't vegetarian. And when I came back from Egypt this last trip, meat just kind of, I don't know, it just sounded repulsive to me for some reason. And it was literally one day to the next. It was like, I can't do this. It was very bizarre, which of course was interesting because family life changes, everything changes when all of a sudden, and I'm not gone to the vegan level and stuff like that. And I won't say that I won't necessarily do that. I'm just following what I'm listening to my body telling me, right? And but I think that another way to bring forward this DMT that's natural inside your mind, so maybe you constantly be on some microdose or something, is math and geometry and expanding consciousness and curiosity, like really wanting to understand yourself, understand with the right intention and curiosity, and then just let the universe kind of speak to you and flow through you, right? Birds don't have to be taught how to be birds. And whales don't have to be taught where to mate. They just know, right? We as human beings, we also probably don't need to be taught if we knew how to tap into our oneness and who we actually are, right? And our role in it. Maybe all the knowledge in the universe is actually available to us, just like geometry is available to us. But whether we choose to jump in, right, to that. And I don't think, a lot of people think that there's this big conspiracy that stuff was hidden and, this information should have been known for thousands of years. And why is it not known for thousands of years? And, there are these 13 bloodlines and all this stuff. I'm just not a big believer in that stuff. I'm just not, because I see it all as a reflection of what's happening inside me, right? And so I tend to look within first before I'm looking outside. And I believe that, Hermeticism was left there, and, things like Rosicrucian, wisdom, etc. It's not telling you to subscribe to any particular religion per se. In fact, it's teaching you non-duality. It's teaching self-love and no shame.
Mm-hmm.
And when you study it, you realize that the reason why it's hidden is so that it can be found by you, not so that it can be taught. You know, this is one of those things that I think we live in a world that people are so used to instant gratification. You know, people will sometimes, when I'll post a geometry or something, and they'll say, explain everything. And I'm like, you know what? I'm not wanting to explain everything because I don't want to ruin the movie for you.
Mm-hmm.
You're on a personal journey, right? It's like, I'm not going to tell you the end of the book if I'm telling you, recommending a book for you to read, right? Because then you won't experience that book. And unless you experience life, and I think that's fundamentally why we're here, why we experience this.
I was about to say, you're pretty much alluding to the exact reason for existence. Yeah.
Yes. You can't learn things without experiencing it. You know, I can study something theoretically, but until I'm like getting my hands into it and dirty and experiencing it, I don't really know what it is. You know, unless I go to Alaska, I can't tell you how blue the sky is in Alaska with no pollution.
This is actually an image here I want to share with you real quick. And you can see it's the universe.
Uh-huh.
If the universe is basically expressing itself and then it's looking back on it. Yeah.
Yeah.
And this is very much like what you're describing here, and the purpose for existence. It's just to have the experience and the experiencer, and then for them to become one.
Yeah, that's one of the statements of my friend Nassim Haramein as well, which is, you know, we are, you know, the universe looking back on itself.
Yeah, that's exactly that photo. Yeah.
And it's funny that, you know, we have this narrow perspective like this you, which is this I, looking at this one segment of the universe and saying, oh, that's what the universe is. And it's separate from me when it's actually all connected. Right? It's connected through this wormhole type of a thing, right? Or Einstein-Rosen bridge. But I'm more excited than ever before that we're on the right path. And bizarre as the world is right now with coronavirus and everything else, this is part of this process.
And it seems like entropy.
It seems like entropy.
Yeah.
But actually, for it even to exist, I remember the first time I went to the pyramid in 2017. We were there on the exact day. And here I was in the pyramid having this really great, you know, sort of spiritual experience with 200 people. And on the exact same day, in front of the fake pyramid, the Luxor Pyramid in Vegas, 500 people get shot.
Wow.
This is duality expressing. Every action must have an equal opposite reaction. Until those actions on the other side are fully transmuted and accepted and loved for just the purpose of experiencing them, they will continue to plague us because our perception will be the plague. In life, I've said this so many times, and I strongly believe this, and I first heard it from Matt Kahn, which is, we attract everything that we judge until we no longer judge what we attract. Another way of saying that is, in life, we attract everything we judge until we learn to love and accept everything that we attract. That is what the transmutation is. That's the shift. And I got there through, you know, means of mathematics and curiosity and love, candidly, and crisis, of which I'm very grateful for now. And, you know, every day is an adventure. You know, hey, I was meeting with a group last night that wants to, you know, do this new show, right? The Real Indiana Jones. I never thought that I would be doing something like that.
Yeah.
I was writing an email to Dan Brown yesterday, right, about this new Da Vinci Code. I mean, like, I'm just loving every single moment right now, good and bad.
And as you continue to express yourself and operate in that way, you'll notice those things being drawn to you as you're drawn to them. You know, it's this beautiful dance that's kind of playing out.
It really is beautiful, you know. And obviously, I'm not super thrilled, I guess, being honest, about the whole coronavirus situation because I can't do my normal day-to-day work. But, you know, I'm also looking forward to, hey, if we all get locked in our houses next week, I've been wanting to get caught up on some, you know, alone time because I haven't had enough of it lately. I haven't had a chance to be able to draw as much as I like to draw, or read and contemplate and study, because I've been sort of surrounded by lots of people. And I want some alone time. So, everything that happens to you, it's about your perception, how you choose to react to it. And that will determine your experience. 90% of what happens to us is what we perceive happened to us, not actually what happened to us. So if we can change our perception, we can change our world. And expanded perception to the point of infinity. So if I could get to the stage where I could look into Metatron's cube and perceive infinite geometries and be able to name every one of them, that's God realization. Because the same would be true as well for looking at the subjectivity of everybody's truth. And that means I have to have empathy and understanding and compassion for everybody's different truth. They're all just divisions of the number one in mathematics.
And then going back to, you need to have that within your own self in order to have that for others. It's it's really wonderful. Well, I think we've had a pretty build. It's about, 2 hours now, a little over 2 hours. So I think we had a great chat, and I think we covered a lot. If anyone has any questions for Robert, I'm sure he's more than happy to answer those, and I'll include all of Robert's information, links, all that in the description of this episode, if you want to have a look at that and delve down deeper into anything that Robert's describing. I also encourage you to check out his Instagram, just cracked over 100,000 followers. Big congrats on that. That's a huge milestone. Yeah, when I saw that, I was a little bit excited for you, because it's exciting to see how excited other people are becoming about this type of stuff. It's like what you said at the beginning of this episode, that most people are not looking to the schooling, system to learn. They're learning outside of that. And I think the content you produce is really contributing to that in a great deal. So I thank you for that. And I thank you for taking the time to have this chat. Perhaps we'll do it again sometime. I'd love to.
Love to. And I appreciate it. And thank you for what you're doing to help spread this message, and again, this is not at all about a religion or a dogma. In fact, it's the opposite. It's what I hope the message that people take is that it's about total acceptance and self-love. And as we all experience that, then that will really change the world. It doesn't mean that you have to stop doing the things you love to do. In fact, it means you love everything that you do. It also means that you can still contribute to the world in the ways in your career and everything that you have been doing already, but you might want to make some shifts and changes. I made the decision to stop eating meat. Okay, whatever, and I don't want to judge other people. I'm over that. I'm over judging other people. Now, it doesn't also mean that everyone's going to see what you see. And that's another quote that Da Vinci left us, where he said, there are three classifications of people in the world: those that see once shown by others, and those who don't see. And it's interesting because he doesn't say those that can't see. He says those that don't see. I think that's an interesting nuance, because it implies some element of will. And not everybody is ready yet to accept themselves fully. And the degree to which they're willing to accept themselves is when they're willing to accept everyone else as they are, without any changes. And think about how powerful that is. Don't we all just want to be loved for who we are, without any conditions? And why do we place conditions on our own life? We do it with time. It's like, it'll be great when I achieve this, or when I graduate. I'm placing a conditionality on my own happiness, based on some future point in time that may never arrive.
These are really self-imposed limitations. Because even when I've had, we all experienced love of a mother or father, even the way you love your daughter. And I've had, getting back to psychedelics, I've had a magic mushroom trip. I always do a meditation in the shower in the mornings, and I like to do it on a stone shower, and preferably in a basement shower, very specific. I like to be deep into the earth, have the water coming down, have the stone tiles and everything, and I do a meditation. Usually it's head down, eyes closed. And I've gone and done a bunch of different trips like that, where I've left my body. without psychedelics. But in one instance in particular, I had magic mushrooms, and I was just sitting back in the shower, and I had this feeling of this water pouring over me, and it was this infinite well of divine love. And it just poured and poured onto me. And I kept just, I guess, I don't know if you'd call this the ego or whatever it is, but it kept just trying to grab and cling to these false illusions of, shame and blame and all these things that you mentioned. And as I was just trying to grab onto these things, it's like they just kept disintegrating and evaporating under this like flowing water, under this unconditional love. And it was beyond anything I've ever experienced from a parent, from that I would share with, my wife or my dog, or anything. This love, it had truly no conditions whatsoever. Almost to the point, if I tried to offer something up to it, it would just be questioning, like, what is it that you're offering? You're offering me nothing, basically. If I try to offer shame, there's no shame to even be offered there. It can't withstand the luminosity of just that glorious, altruistic, all compassionate love that I was experiencing. And I think that everyone has this at all times. At all times. Like as we speak, you and I both have this pouring onto us. It's infinite, never ends. And we can't really comprehend infinity, but it never ends, and it's always pouring on everyone. And we just put these layers upon layers to prevent this from happening, and then we just forget that it's there entirely. So I think that having these conversations, and I think just mainly these conversations, is really one of the big factors of what's causing that shift in humanity. People are coming to that realization, opening up, expanding themselves. I think a lot has to do with the heart as well. And I'm into religion, and into specifically the relation between Christ and Hanuman is very interesting to me, and the opening up of the heart, exposing the heart to the world, because in doing so you're revealing your vulnerability, but at the same time you're doing so in such strength, because there is strength in that vulnerability. So I don't know how I got on this tangent, but it's really just what you were describing earlier just reminded me of this flowing of love, and that the people just really don't embrace it and don't surrender to it. And I think that more people need to do that and really accept that. And I think it just takes a lot of surrender and getting
surrender
rid of
is a beautiful word. And I didn't really answer. I was just thinking back. I didn't answer your question very well on one topic. So I just want to touch on this.
Sure.
I'm sure I do answer it well, because you talked about psychedelic trips that people have gone on, and then they talk about maybe experiencing communication with either the higher self, source, or some alien entity or something like that, maybe angels or whatever. And the way I would answer that is as follows. If I'm a grasshopper and I live in a field, what is my universe? If I never leave that field, that's my whole world. I don't know anything but what the grasshopper would experience. What other kind of bugs are there in the field? Every once in a while, a big dog comes along and probably, drops something on me. Well, that kind of sucks. But I probably see that as completely like unlucky, right? It's just like, oh shit, I got shit on today, right? And I have a very limited consciousness, right, on what I'm experiencing. But I'm maybe still happy, in that, living in that field. Let's say I die, I get reincarnated, and I come back as a monkey, right? You mentioned Hanuman, right?
Yeah.
The monkey man. I was just in India recently when I went to go meet with the Dalai Lama. And it was interesting because I was thinking about, okay, if I'm a monkey, then I live in a jungle. So now the amount of biodiversity is much greater than the field, right? So my biodiversity around me is now both flora and fauna. I have different trees and everything. I'm not just a grass field or a high, sort of like wheat field or something. I'm living in a jungle, and there's different animals. There's a sloth, there's other species of monkeys. There's lions potentially, or big cats, leopards, or whatever in this jungle. And I have to now learn how to deal with those expansions of this field of my existence. The biodiversity, the flora, the fauna has now increased. Now, let's say I live in Arkansas. And to those that live in Arkansas, there's nothing bad about that. It was pretty funny. I was just on the phone with, before I went to Egypt, with Mohammed Ibrahim. He's a famous Egyptologist and hieroglyphics expert who was with me the night I discovered the Alpha Omega. He's one of the guys that said, "Did you make that?" It's pretty funny. And then he stopped himself. He said, of course you couldn't have made that. That's ridiculous. It was pretty funny.
Yeah.
But he says to me, he's like, oh, I was in Laughlin, Nevada, speaking at a conference, right, on Egyptology. And I'm like, dude, he goes, I call him, he goes, I'm in Walmart in Laughlin, Nevada. And I'm like, dude, you're in bumfuck Egypt, right? That's like,
Yeah.
and he's like, what is bumfuck Egypt? He's from Egypt, right? And I'm like having to explain to him, like, that's like really backwater stuff. So let's say you live in that town and you never travel, you never go anywhere. You never see beyond, the mountains. You never see anything more than that. That is your world. That's your universe. That's your experience. The people that live in your town, they end up in similar jobs. And I lived in a small town in Nebraska, and lots of my friends stayed in Nebraska. They stayed in that same small town. They never traveled anywhere. So they've limited the scope of their venturing out of the zone of their consciousness, right? And the more you push yourself out of that zone to have more diverse experiences, you meet different people. I mean, if you live in a certain part of the country, you may never see ethnic diversity. Right? Seeing somebody, when I lived in Nebraska, we had one African-American kid in our school. One. And he played every sport, and he was a rock star in every sport. And he was like everybody's buddy, right? But like literally it was like, oh yeah, he could have been an alien to the people that lived in that small town when he ended up moving into that town. Okay. And so as we go to the next level, I moved to a big city. I've got lots of ethnic diversity. I'm traveling all over the world. The scope of my world is now expanded. I've got absolute experience with biodiversity and flora and fauna. I go on vacations to Africa. I see and experience all kinds of different things, and I'm meeting all kinds of different people I never thought from all walks of life that I would meet. As we transcend to the next octave, and I use the term octave on purpose, right? This next stage of consciousness, why would we not have another expansion in biodiversity?
Mm-hmm. You use the term, the phrase octave. I literally the last episode of this podcast was with Paul Selig, author and channeler. I'm not sure if you're familiar with his work.
I heard of it. Mm-hmm.
And he uses the same terminology, octave, and raising humanity up to a higher octave. So it's very interesting.
I mean, each octave has its own undertone series, right? It's all musical harmonics. That's right. Music and math are just mere reflections of each other. That's it. Right? Mm-hmm. And their nexus is geometry. So you could say that geometry is just frozen sound. Geometry is frozen sound. That's why when I make a logo, it has a certain resonance. That resonance is speaking to us because it has a silent music associated with it. Light is the music that we cannot hear but can see. And sound is the light, right? And the artwork that we hear but cannot see. Right? It's like they're connected. They're absolutely connected. And they're just transverse waves versus longitudinal waves. But the point is, as we go to higher realms of consciousness, and right now we're pushing through an octaval shift, which is a gap. There's a gap, right? Each of the notes exist as undertone series, like layers of an onion. And then within each note, there's another 12. And in each note, there's another 12. But there's actually 14 notes in a full octave. And we use baseline mathematics. And I published this paper on the geometry of this, which is going around music studios around the country right now, because it's proving that the mathematics of the geometry of 432 is creating closed natural geometries, whereas 440 does not. It's a geometric relationship. No geometry, if you add the sum of angles of all geometry, they will always sum to the number 9 without exception. Whether they are Platonic solids or whether they are Archimedean solids, it doesn't matter. So you take a two-dimensional polygonal geometry, Archimedean, or rather Euclidean geometry, and you take a square. What's the sum of angles of a square? This goes back to 4th grade, right? It's 360 degrees. What's the sum of angles of a triangle? It's 180. So 3 plus 6 plus 0 equals 9. 180. 1 plus 8 plus 0 equals 9. So what's a pentagon? 540. 5 plus 4 plus 0 equals 9. What's a hexagon? 720. 7 plus 2 equals 9. What's an octagon, right? It's 1080, right? 1 plus 8 equals 9. I could go infinitely, and it will always sum to the number 9. And so the relationship is that if I played in hertz music, a F sharp, which is 360 hertz, and I play a perfect F sharp major chord, the exact same one that resonates in the King's Chamber in the Great Pyramid, F sharp major chord in 5-part harmony, and I match that against the sum of angles of polygonal geometry, it's perfect. So 360 degrees becomes 360 hertz. 540 degrees for sum of angles of a pentagon becomes 540 hertz. 540 hertz is a C sharp. That's part of the F sharp major chord, right? So then the hexagon, 720, that's back to F sharp again. So I started with 360. I go 360 with the square and circle. Then I go 540 with the pentagon, just increasing the sides by 1. That's 540. Then I go 720. That's F sharp again. So now I've got a perfect fifth relationship in music. And then I go to the next one, right? And the next one is going to be 900 hertz, right? Which is a heptagon. 900 gives me the A sharp. And then I go up again to the next one, which is going to be 1080, which gives me the C sharp that's necessary to fill out the triplet inside the F sharp major chord. Each geometry with each expansion of one side is creating in perfection the entire F sharp major chord in 5-part harmony. And that's true also as you go up to higher octaves using platonic solids, do the exact same thing. It's all music. And as we go to the next level, the last 2 notes, right, of the 14 notes that actually reside in an octave, two of which are actually gap positions at polarity shifts. So right before you get to the next octave, there's a gap, like a black hole, like a still point. And it's enharmonic. It doesn't harmonize with anything. It doesn't sound good. It would be the equivalent if there were a B sharp in music, right? We just say B sharp is the same as C. But what if there's actually a subtle difference between the two? There's actually another note in there. When you use 9-base math, it actually shows that there should be another note in there. We've been in that note. That's where we are right now. We're about to jump up to the next octave. But breaking through that barrier of the still point means a polarity shift, a pole shift, right? And that's what's happening right now. That is where the world consciousness is today. And so as we jump to that next octave, then more and more people are going to have more and more experiences reported with increased biodiversity in the universe or galaxy. That means that now you will start experiencing, as some already have, relationships and interdimensional, experiences with extraterrestrial beings. It's no different than the grasshopper who got reincarnated or learned that there's more to the universe than just the field.
Mm-hmm.
That's all it is.
Broadening and opening up the perceptions of everything, yeah.
It's seeing more and more geometry in Metatron's cube and being able to look at all the mess of lines, and which is spoken of as entropic, and actually pull out the simplicity and the syntropy from the entropy. That's what the next level is. So I want to make sure I answer that question for you. I think, the way the government, I thought it was pretty funny when the government said, oh, we're going to release all the UFO files. And then they said, oh, shit, we're not going to do that now. Changed our minds like 2 months ago. And then the military said, well, if we did it, it would open up grave national security concerns. Like, okay, if you were trying to keep us from like freaking out, that didn't help, right? If people are really worried about like, Independence Day coming or something like that, which I don't believe either, because the thing with expansion of consciousness, even in order to get to that stage, if there were sentient life on other planets, wouldn't they also be subject to the same parameters or barriers to entry to overcome superluminal travel? Of course they would. And the only way that they could get there also was through ascending and transmuting through duality and beyond it. So I don't believe in like bad aliens coming and people are saying there's this agenda and I don't believe in any of that shit.
Yeah, a lot of people get really caught up in a lot of the conspiracy stuff, the Greys, the reptilians, and all this nonsense, But then, you got other people that they see the good entities, the Pleiadians, and all this other, I don't bother getting too caught up in all that stuff, but some people are very into it. I try to avoid posting a lot of that on the page as well, because I find that it just contributes to the confusion, delusion. We don't really need to bother with all that. Don't need to just do away with it all, because I think that going within is really the only solution.
All the answers to the universe are inside you.
Mm-hmm.
And it's funny because sometimes I'll post stuff that's a little provocative just for fun, right? Like I posted one meme that was just like as a joke. And it had a picture of the solar system and all the planets were there except Earth. Earth was like a pancake, and it was like flat as a pancake, and it was a square. And then the meme said, you know, oh, this is awkward. Right?
Yeah.
And, oh my gosh, the response I got from the flat Earth community was unbelievable.
Yeah.
It was just kind of like a funny thing. You could have seen it from their perspective, which is, hey, it's awkward, you know, the Earth is flat and this is the truth and here's what it is. But no, they didn't see it from that perspective. They saw it completely from a different perspective, which was, you know, sort of poking fun at, wait a minute, all the other planets are round and we're flat and we have a dome, right? And it was really fascinating for me to see the reaction I got, but I got like 1,000 comments like that fast.
Yeah.
It was nuts.
That's the way, you know, social media goes. You got to post something that's like a little triggering for some people, and then, which is weird how the algorithms do that at all. You know, it's a little bit strange, but it is what it is.
That's right. Well, listen, I really appreciate you taking the time with me today, and I'm happy to answer anyone's questions. And if you would like to follow this work on a real-time basis, I actually do most of the posting myself. I do have someone who helps me named Jimmy Janover, who does, he's fantastic, and he does a lot of my Facebook stuff. But I do probably 75% or so of my Instagram posts. It's like, so it's real time as well. I'm not worried about impressing anyone, including myself. So I post what I'm thinking and what I'm feeling when I do it.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm not worried about, oh, this has got to be perfect. And if it's not perfect, I'll say it's not perfect. It's fine.
Mm-hmm.
It could be a work in progress. In fact, I might be asking you to help me see something.
That's right, yeah. I like that aspect of things. I like getting the community involved, and I think people like that too. So.
Yeah, totally. We're all in the same journey. Everyone's in the same journey together.
Mm-hmm.
So we might as well enjoy it. We might as well do it together.
Absolutely. Well, thank you again, Robert. I'm sure we'll talk again soon, and I'll give you the namaste.
Thank you, namaste. Right, that does not mean love and light FU, right? That means
yeah.
I enjoyed this time with you.
Yeah.
And I learned a lot listening to you, and I've learned a lot also following you. So thank you so much, and to all your viewers, have a great weekend, and all the best, and hope to see you soon.
Perfect. Thank you. I hope to see you soon as well. Take care.